relies explicitly on your ability to show how fundamentally unlike things are like, right? So you can only get the metaphor by grasping that relationship. The kingdom of heaven is not a mustard seed, right? Well, in what sense is it like a mustard seed, right? So, but I think this is what's going on in a parable at a literary level is something like a puzzle you can only solve by becoming the person who can solve the puzzle, or it's like a weight you can only lift by becoming the person who can lift the weight, right? So it's hidden so that you have to do, as it were, the work, or become the person wise enough that can grasp the truth that is hidden in it. And so that it has, whereas say something more declarative or descriptive,
That's right.
is sort of plainly there. We think, well, okay, well, I've got that. Well, do you have that?
It's a qualitative shift.
You can only get it by getting it.
But this is profoundly challenging for our culture. I agree with you completely, Stephen, because we have shifted into the idea that truths do not require transformation in order to be disclosed. This is a pervasive feature of the Cartesian framework. All you need is the universal method, and these are saying, no, you have to transform. You have to become a different
new
person.
Wineskins.
Yes, exactly.
New wineskins,
Exactly
or it's going to break you.
Yeah.
Well,
It's an axiomatic transformation.
That surely is where the last of the first of the parables we looked at in terms of the seed. Surely that's the question you're meant to be asking at the end: is, am I good ground or bad ground?
Exactly.
What does it mean to become good ground to receive the word? And what is the word? And have I received and heard? And what is the fruit that has come forth, if so?
All right, so
it's worth,
go ahead, Dennis.
I just think everybody would find of interest, and I'd be curious how this would play out in light of Jesus' statement about new wine needs new skin. As I understand it, and certainly as all of normative Judaism has understood it, including its greatest philosopher, Maimonides, the entire sacrificial system upon which the theology of Christ is based is indeed new wine in old skins. Every single culture on earth used sacrifice as its mode of prayer, and it predates the Jews. Cain and Abel brought a sacrifice. Noah brought a sacrifice. This is the universal way of expressing things, and what the Torah did with sacrifice was to ethicize it and to deep paganize it. So, for example, the most common sacrifice was the burnt offering. And why? To show the Israelites that God doesn't eat. So the entire sacrifice was burned. This way, the Israelite sees, oh, our God doesn't eat. Food was brought to all other gods. Number two, there is no petitionary sacrifice in the Torah. All sacrifice was asking the gods for favors in all of history. The sacrifices are overwhelmingly, I feel that I sinned, I am bringing a sacrifice, or I really did sin, and I made good on what I did, and so I'm bringing a sacrifice of atonement or a sacrifice of gratitude. But so the entire meaning of sacrifice was transformed by the Torah, but it was old skin. I just thought that's important to note.
It's a tricky conundrum, because any sacrifice, psychologically speaking, any sacrifice is the instantiation of a partial new identity. And the most profound sacrifice would be the transformation of identity that's almost complete. You see that in the Torah, right? Because you see that with Abraham when he receives his new name, and you see it when Jacob receives his new name. You have a sacrifice that's so complete there that there's a literal transformation of identity. And so that's a strange conundrum, because the necessity of the sacrificial remains constant, but the consequence of the sacrifice is utterly transformational. And this is speaking of the limit case of that. So we know that all of this is occurring within the framework of Jewish thought. So, and we know also that Christ has this insistence that what he is the embodiment of the law and the prophets, right? So there's this strange tension between maintenance of the tradition and the radical transformation that full sacrifice is called upon to produce. So I'm going to go to the pearl, and John, maybe you can pick it up from there.
Okay.
This is maybe the final extension or elaboration, it's another elaboration of the idea of the seed. Matthew 13, 44, 53. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. A man found it and quickly covered it up again. Then in his joy, he went and sold all that he had and bought that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant searching for fine pearls, who on finding one pearl of great price went and sold all that he had and bought it. Or the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet which is thrown into the sea and gathered fish of every kind. When it was full, men drew it ashore and sat down and sorted the good fish into baskets, but threw away the bad ones. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come and separate the wicked from the righteous, and will throw them into the fiery furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Have you understood all these things? Jesus asked. They said to him, yes, Lord. And he said to them,
like, yes, Socrates.
because of this, every scribe who has been instructed about the kingdom of heaven is like the master of a household who is able to bring out of his storeroom new treasures as well as old ones. Okay, so what's happening here? Well, there's an idea that all treasure can be subordinated to the ultimate treasure. And I would say that's something like the treasure that produces all treasure. It's something like that. There's an echo in there, too, of the dragon fight, because the quest is the eternal hunt for treasure, but the treasure is to be found where the dragons threaten. And you see that echoed in the crucifixion motif. The pathway to glory is through death and evil. And so, and then there's a third idea that's exemplified here, that this idea that's key, this pearl of great price, is so valuable that any earthly treasure whatsoever is to be regarded as negligible in contrast. And that touches on the themes of generous productivity and hospitality that we've already developed. And Christ makes reference to that later too, when he tells people to store up treasure in heaven and not on earth, where moths can devour and thieves can steal. The idea of storing up in heaven and finding the pearl of great price are the same thing. It's to conduct yourself in a manner that ensures productive, reciprocal generosity into the future for you in a way that does that for everyone else. And if everyone in the society does that simultaneously, then the whole society is continually capable of bringing forth treasure, and doing that in abundance and doing that in harmony. And if you know the key to that, that's the same as the Abrahamic adventure, right? It's the same as Moses' leadership. If you know that, everything else is so irrelevant in contrast that it looks like nothing at all. That's the secret. That's the secret pathway forward to the greatest treasure that the worst dragon hides. It's something like that.
It's the unity of God. I think of Kierkegaard, someone mentioned earlier, a saint is someone whose life is about one thing. So not a monotonous life, but a life that's focused on the one. There's the purity of heart. But also the kingdom of God is like the merchant's search for the pearl of great price. When you find that path of the inexhaustible good, you're on the path of the kingdom. All the goods of the world are exhaustible in a way. They're not going to be satisfactory. But when you find the search that will never end, and I think of Aquinas says, in heaven, we will truly know how incomprehensible God is. So we get a sense of it here, but in heaven, it's not like, okay, now we're done. There it is. It's now the search really begins in earnest and with great joy and enthusiasm. So it's the search for the pearl that the kingdom is like.
And there's a headline to all of this that's being argued so beautifully, which is that there's no fundamental difference between long-term effective strategy and morality.
Right. And maturity. So I interviewed this character. This is relevant to your point about aggression and its integration, let's say. I interviewed this character, Jocko Willink, who's quite the monster, and he wanted to be a soldier, like a rampaging Thor soldier from the time he was 3, and that's the pathway he took. He became a Navy SEAL, and he could have easily been a criminal, and he knows this, and he's talked about it to me in great detail. What he discovered when he went off to become a Navy SEAL was that he started to become a mentor to young men and to encourage them to develop, and he found that was so meaningful that everything else he wanted that was partial or instrumental, even in this kind of violent and aggressive, forceful manner, which he's perfectly capable of managing, he said that just paled by comparison, that there's a pleasure and joy that's eternal in this form of radical giving and inviting that is incomparably better than anything else you can possibly imagine. And, you know, you see this in the treatment literature for alcoholism. So it's been known for 50 years at least that about the only cure for alcoholism that's ever been discovered is religious transformation. All the atheist researchers know this too. They don't know why.
Right.
But I believe the reason for it is actually quite straightforward, is that if you're a worshiper of Dionysius, and Dionysius is an effective god for you, or Bacchus, if alcohol really works for you, it calms anxiety, it increases hope, it increases the sense of belonging. It's a extremely useful source of calories. It's a blast, it's fun. Like, why would you give that up? And the answer seems to be, you have to find something better, right? You have to find a spirit that's more nourishing. And the 12-step programs are, of course, predicated on that, but they're Christian, they're Judeo-Christian in their fundamental essence. And the idea is that if you have a addiction, if you're hooked on something that's immediate and instrumental, you can't just stop doing that. You have to replace it with a much more profound source of gratification.
And that's weirdly fractal also, because the answer is, as would be taught, if you're craving alcohol, you don't just not drink, you get sparkling water. Like, you need a replacement at every behavioral level.
Right.
But this is profound, but it's also playful in the way that Jesus is presenting it. I mean, I think there's the Hausinger in his Homo Ludens has these wonderful passages about the origins of philosophy and the riddle and the playful nature of a certain kind of teaching that is a playfulness that is linked to a more profound seriousness.
Well, yeah, I want to pick up on that, because what we're talking about here, right, is we're talking like almost, there's a perspectival clash going on here, right? And if the perspectival clash is too great, you get a paradox. The sentence I'm now uttering is false. Yeah. And you just cycle, and intelligibility breaks down. And then on the other end, you have where the perspectival clash is resolved by play. And that's a joke or a metaphor, right? You can resolve it. But the thing here is we're trying to do the kind of play, but we're not just playing, again, with, I keep on hammering on this, we're not playing with just identity. We're not just playing with concepts. We're playing like you play serious music. We're playing with our identity. And the reason why that's important, I'll shut up in a sec, right, is we're talking about transformative experience here. And, and I know L.A. Paul, and she literally wrote the book on transformative experience called Transformative Experience. And the point about transformative experiences is you face a really difficult challenge. She does a thought experiment. Your friends come to you and they give you undeniable proof that they can turn you into a vampire. Should you do it? And you go, and her point is, you don't know, because you may have propositional knowledge about vampires. Maybe you've got some good skills, you can lurk well or something, but you don't know what it's going to be like to be a vampire. You don't have that perspectival knowing. You don't know how to see the world as a vampire. And you don't know who you're going to be. You don't have that participatory change, so you're actually ignorant. And the point she makes is you can't infer your way through this. Transformative experiences can't be inferred. So it's not only that we can't, these metaphors are even challenging the way we normally try to figure out how we're going to make ourselves.
That's why you need a leap of faith.
Well, exactly.
And that's Kierkegaard. It's actually the leap into faith.
It's a very helpful way for secular people, and Laurie Poole is not a believer, I don't think. I found it a very helpful way to explain to the secular person why decisions that will be life-changing.
Like having a child.
There's the vampire example, but she also uses just, getting married.
Yeah, exactly.
New job.
You can have third-person propositional knowledge from somebody about what it's like, but you cannot actually ever make a decision with that knowledge by definition, because that knowledge doesn't come until after.
First.
And so there's always going to be that element of faith with those really fundamental, life-changing decisions.
You'll like this, and because I've talked to Laurie about this. Okay, then how do we do it, right? And if you look at the developmental literature, because children are facing those. Think about moving from one Piagetian stage to another, right? Well, they play.
Yes, exactly.
What they do is they get something which allows them to taste what that perspective and that identity will be like.
But that's the idea of the weeds and the tares, the tares and the weed growing together. That's definitely part of it. It's like and the idea of Jesus talking about the day of judgment at the end where this is going to be resolved, it's the same as finding the pearl of great price ultimately, right? Because you have this field, you have all these things, right? I don't know, like you're teaching a kid how to go upstairs and you're like, don't do this, do that, do that. Like, you know, this is how you do it. Be careful here, be careful there. And it's like, and they're doing this. And all of a sudden they get it.
Yes.
The insight comes. They understand, the purpose enters into them, and then all of the rest falls away. Like the judgment happens automatically. I don't have to even think about what gesture I'm doing anymore because now I know the reason why I'm doing it. And so what Jesus is talking about is, I mean, I always say Jesus is just describing reality. He's saying this is how the world functions. And so what he describes as the pearl of great price is true for your existential, you know, facing God, but it's also true for learning how to go upstairs or like finding out
Jonathan,
what grammar's for.
I think it's doing both, and you and I have talked about this, so I won't. I think it's describing reality realization, and I think it's describing relevance realization, and it's doing this together.
I agree.
Douglas, that invitation to play, that echoes on a variety of different planes, because the first is that Christ is also portrayed as the antithesis of power. Right? It's the pathway that's alternative to power. And I think the best way to conceptualize that is the invitation to play, right? Because play is easily suppressed by any competing motivational state. And if the person that you're interacting with has to be compelled, it's not play. It has to be invitational, right? And so, and then the other echo is that when children are playing, when they set up their pretend play scenarios, they are experimenting with the transformation of perception and patterns of attention and identity.
Exactly.
Right? It's not conceptual. It's like you play out being the son, you play out being the mother, you play out being the father. You adopt that identity. You attempt to see the world through that perspective, right? You adopt all the conceptions that are part of that frame, but the play is the transformation of the frames. And so these Zen-like cone parables are invitations to play. And Christ isn't hitting people over the head with them, although there's warnings that come along with it. It's the invitation to listen and to play along, right? And to try the cross on for size.
Help me with that's interesting, because I think of Romano Guardini, the great liturgical theologian, compared the liturgy to play. Liturgy is the highest form of play because it's the most useless thing. It's therefore the highest thing. But even the fact, you know, now I've been a priest for 38 years, and when you enter into the liturgy, well, we put on vestments of great color, and I put on a high hat as a bishop and have a ring on, and we process, and there's a kind of a liturgical dance around the altar as we move and so on. And then we listen to these very scriptures. We play act in a way, you know, so the Eucharistic prayer is that the night before he died, Jesus took bread, and that it is playful. There's something, and it's meant to be transformative. You're meant to go into the liturgy and come out as a different person.
The Passion is a play with death and malevolence.
Right.
And that's the deep, obviously that has to be the deepest form of play. And you might say, well, that's a hell of a way to characterize it. It's like, no, we do that in literature all the time. Like deep literature plays with death and malevolence.
Exactly.
That's what makes it profound. And
yes.
I did realize years ago that even if I was lecturing about the most serious things, that if I did it artfully, there would be an element of play in it. Mm-hmm. And that struck me as impossible in some ways, but I know that it's true.
And this paradox of the ludic, or sometimes even the ridiculous, and the serious is... Hausinger has this wonderful instance of the wig, where he says, think about the wig. It's an absurd, archaic item that belonged, of course, to a gentleman's costume in the 18th century, but then, of course, dies out because of the French Revolution, basically. However, in the courtroom, the judge puts on this ridiculous item, and it signifies justice. It signifies this, and Hausinger, of course, is very interested in the demarcation of the place of play. So the courtroom, symbolized in many respects by features like the wig, becomes this special area where justice is effective. So the ridiculous item is a way of signifying the seriousness of what's going on. And I think there are interesting parallels in contemporary culture. Like, for example, in Britain at the moment, if you go to a doctor, the doctor will be dressed in a very casual way. Famously, great consultants in Britain would turn up in the Rolls Royce and they'd be surrounded by, their attendants or whatever. I mean, that was, of course, a bit of a cliche, but the sense of a certain kind of attire, the sense of, maybe not the wig, but some way of signaling, perhaps in a playful way, the seriousness of what is occurring. Yes. And I think that's something which in our technocratic culture, and Hausinger, by the way, was critiquing the technocracies of the totalitarian regimes. He's thinking particularly of Nazi Germany, but also communism, these mass states where the individual is being crushed. And that book, Homo Ludens, is all about an appeal for a recovery of the sense of the human and the sense of the human through this notion of serious play.
Totalitarian regimes hate play.
Yeah.
It softens perception shift also. I mean, one of the things in advertising, in political messaging, if you come in, doom and gloom, then it initiates everyone's kind of fight or flight. And sometimes a message attacking one candidate can push people towards the opposite direction of what's being said because their whole nervous system's initiated. But with humor, it opens people up perceptually, because if you're laughing, you're in a state of receiving.
I'm not sure there's any group of people that Jesus refers to positively as giving a sense of what the kingdom of God is like, except for children.
Right.
And
that's the seriousness of their play.
The seriousness of their play and their openness, their very sort of natural sense of trust. And the sense of like a kind of carefree.
Their unshattered faith.
That's it. That's right.
Life is but a birth and a forgetting.
I think we have to approach the parables with a meditative spirit. We have to let the parable work on us, and then also listen to several parables. Let them play with each other. It's like, why does he say, so the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed? The kingdom of God is like a net? And all these weird relationships. And just let that work inside you. And at some point, it yields some surprising insights. It will yield a basic understanding. And even for people that aren't intellectual, for some of those people, it won't even yield an understanding. It becomes a kind of background to your experience, right? It becomes the world in which you live, even without knowing. So parables work on everyone, from a child to the most intellectual scholar. It's possible.
All right, so let's go to the plans of the wealthy. Luke 12:13-21 and 31-34. Someone in the crowd outside called to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide our father's inheritance with me." But Jesus replied, "My friend, who appointed me as a judge or arbitrator over you, especially for that kind of question?" And he cautioned them, "Take care and beware of all forms of greed and covetousness, for a man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them this parable. "The lands of a certain rich man brought forth a plentiful crop, and the man thought to himself, 'What shall I do? For I have no place to store my harvest.' Then he said, 'I'll do this. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store up all my grain and my goods. And I will say to myself, my friend, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Now take your ease. Eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'Thou fool, this very night thy life shall be demanded from you. And who then will take possession of the things you have prepared for yourself? So it shall be with anyone who stores up riches for himself and is not rich toward God. Rather, therefore, seek the kingdom of God, and all the needful things of the world shall be yours as well. Do not fear, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell all that you have and give to the poor. Provide yourself with purses that never wear out, with a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief can come near and no moth destroy. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." Well, so that's a callback to the Sermon on the Mount, obviously. It's also a caution against putting your faith in the instrumental, putting your faith in material security, for example. It's not that security is undesirable. It's not even that wealth is undesirable. That isn't what this parable says. It says wealth that's placed primary is undesirable. It's another indication of things being put in their proper place. And the sell all you have to give to the poor that's a prodroma for the parable of the rich man, right? The young rich man who's follows all the rules but is still not in the kingdom of God, and Christ tells him to sell everything he has and follow him. And so
how do you answer the left who use that as an example of where Jesus would find himself comfortable in today's left?
Well, in the rich man parable, I think that's pretty clear.
But specifically there, sell all you have and give to the poor.
Well, I think it has to be. I think it has to be
Theft
interpreted.
is property is the motto.
Right. I think it has to be interpreted in light of that broader explication of the idea. The rich young man comes to Christ in a very particular way. He hops on the cart and he says, "Look, I think I'm doing all right. I'm keeping the law. I'm attending to the rules of the prophets. I honor my mother and my father, but things aren't working out well for me." And Jesus says to him, "Well, if you're doing all that and it's not working for you, there's something that you're clinging on to that's interfering with your progress forward. Perhaps it's everything that you own. So sell all you own and follow me." I mean, that's a very complex piece of advice. It's like, we've tried all these other things. Something's impeding you. Might be your wealth, because that's what you love more. You need to get rid of that, but not just get rid of that and not just share it with the poor. It's like, get rid of it, share it with the poor, and follow me, which is to pick up that cross of self-sacrifice. And it's not a socialist injunction in the least.
No, because it's for that kid at that moment. It's like we mentioned some of the Buddhist stories. Isn't there one about the kid that comes to the master and says, I want enlightenment, and the master cut his hand off? I used to tell my students, you think you got a tough spiritual direction. But it's these kind of shocking things of, okay, look, you're really caught up in something bad. Or Aristotle saying, if the stick is bent this way, you want to straighten it out, you got to bend it back the other way. It's like these kind of shocking, do this.
Like get rid of your eye.
Right, but it's not like, oh, now here's the way we're all going to live from now on, that we're all just going to, have. But I think it's to shock these people into this new awareness, this new consciousness.
But the truth is, though, is that if you do that, if you do give up all your wealth and you follow him, it will produce that. Like it will bring you into a place that is different from those of us that don't, or from those of us that are still, attached. Like
and there are people that really do it.
That's right.
That's true. There are some.
They become shining
I've known
beacons.
some of them.
It's like they become these beacons for the world. They're not, like you said, I don't think that. It's like Christ is showing the top. He's showing the limit. He's saying,
right.
Yes, isn't he saying we are what we aspire to?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, he's saying that
now put them in order. Now get them in right hierarchy.
You've known people who've done that. You say
there was a young nun I knew many years ago. She was a lay woman at the time, but she was so struck by these texts, and I think she knew where she was spiritually, and she took everything she owned, put it in the car, and she drove down to a poor area of Chicago, and she began handing things away to people.
And then how did she live?
And then she became a nun in Paris.
That all monks do that.
Yeah. So
all
there's a
monks
tradition of that.
Right, so there's a place for
their
a rarefied few for this. This is not an injunction for the mass.
But for everyone, I think it's to be detached from material things and to put your values in the right hierarchy. I think that's for everybody.
And also, property is theft without the added part. So who do you follow after that? The threat of your own resentment? Right? The follow piece is missing in property.
Well, it's like the injunction that God gives to Moses when he confronts the Pharaoh. He doesn't just say, "Let my people go."
Yeah.
He says, "Let my people go so they may worship me properly in the desert." And that's the other, I think, error on the socialist side of things is the socialists also believe that money is redeeming. It's just that more people need to have it. Right? They're just as tied to money, or even more so than the capitalists. Yeah. And this isn't that
That's not what
emphasis.
It's about at all.
It's part of what's happening here is the same idea of the meekness in some sense. It's like part of the problem with material abundance is that it can become the thing that you worship, in which case it's a terrible impediment. And if that's the situation that you're in, and it's something for everybody who has anything to always consider, if that's the situation you're in, the need for radical surgery may be,
so
may be immediate.
In effect, there's an if. If you are X, Y, and Z, then sell all you have. This is not an injunction for humanity.
That's the way I understand it.
No, I'm fine with it.
Because Christ is also like he sits with the people who drink wine and enjoy life, and he says to render unto Caesar. There's no critique here of the abundant state per se. The critique seems to me to be, it's a critique essentially of worship of the golden calf.
It's an attachment to it, right?
Yeah, and
Worship of
it's a fractal.
Right.
It's a
So,
fractal
like,
thing.
you can't get off addiction to drugs partially. Sell all your drugs.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's right.
There's that's right. There's sometimes, well, that is exactly what happens in the parable of the rich young man. Christ does a very careful differential diagnosis first before recommending this radical treatment. He says, well, here's 10 things you should be doing to put your life together. And the young man says, I'm really doing all of those. And Christ says, well, something that you're grabbing onto is stopping you. And in your case, you have this abundance of wealth. That's the most logical impediment to your movement forward. And so you better consider that.
In a weird